You wake up to a world that tells you strength is toxic, dominance is dangerous, control is oppressive. You scroll news feeds that declare submission the new virtue, confiscating voices, censoring dissent. You feel it in your bones. Something fundamental is being stolen from you. Not your job, not your girlfriend. Something deeper, your right to self-sovereignty. That's Locke's alarm bell. The man who wrote about natural rights didn't champion democracy because it's polite. He championed it because tyranny, any tyranny, is the death of manhood. Because when you don't own your labor, your mind, your body, someone else owns you. Feminine culture, soft philosophies, emotional authoritarianism. When they silence men under the banner of balance, that's tyranny. And rebellion becomes virtue. Locke said government's only job is to secure life, liberty, property. Anything beyond that is theft. But we don't wear crowns or march in uniform anymore. Tyranny hides in soft hands and velvet cages. You might not see the sheriff, but you feel his presence when you're not aligning. You feel him in the guilt that holds back your ambition, in the resentment that simmers when you have to soften to fit in the silence you impose on your fire. This is your call to arms, not with guns, but with clarity, not with war, but with intentional living, not by casting down power, but by refusing to let it be taken. You feel it when she says, "You don't understand me," and you shrink. When your boss suggests you take one for the team, and you obey. When society demands you speak in whispers about race, about gender, about culture, and you comply out of fear. That compliance isn't peace, it's submission. Locke taught that men are born free and equal, not equal as identical, but equal as sovereign, not as vessels to be filled, but as forces to be directed. He knew any authority greater than your own, especially when unchosen, is tyranny. And tyranny anywhere is tyranny everywhere. You feel it in the little tyrannies. A mother guilt-tripping you into emotional labor. A partner accusing you of patriarchy when you set a boundary. A culture shaming you for having standards, for wanting more, for not being safe enough. That's not affection. It's policing. It's control wrapped in attraction. She may love you, but she doesn't have a right to own your capacity. No one does, especially when it's disguised as tenderness. Locke would say, that is theft, that is tyranny, and you must resist. Rebellion doesn't mean harshness. It means ownership. It means you refuse to be left-handed in your own life. You own your work, your body, your time, your spirit. You don't swivel when the crowd leans left. You breathe through disagreement. You speak truth, even when it fractures a fragile ego. You fight ignorance not with noise, but with reason. You protect your property not with aggression, but with discipline. You guard your liberty not with violence, but with consistency. Locke said that where there is no law, there is no freedom. But he also said that when law makes your labor his, your boundaries theft, your mind his property, you're not free either. You feel it when educational institutions demand ideology in place of teaching, when social media guilt trashes your contribution unless you affirm a hashtag, when companies erase merit and reward compliance. That's tyranny, and it's global, but local too. It lives in your living room if you let it. This is not theory, it's your life. It's your daily revolt or daily surrender. You will submit, or you will reclaim. You'll rise from that bed with tenacity. You'll speak in boardrooms without bowing. You'll build structures of value, business, habit, community, without apology. That's the masculine duty Locke talked about. Not because he foresaw Twitter mobs, because he understood the human heart. He knew the fight for self-ownership never ends. It just changes shape. The tyrannies of old wore tricorn hats. The tyrannies of now wear virtue masks. And you see through them, because you felt blind obedience cost too much, because you've swallowed guilt to avoid friction, because you've muted your fire for fear of being labeled toxic. But that observation isn't enough. Locke demands the next step. Revolt. You revolt by living as though you own your life, even when others try to pawn your power for their comfort. You revolt by pursuing excellence when approval demands mediocrity. You revolt by embracing conflict when peace expects silence. You revolt by breathing freedom even when social airwaves try to filter your voice. Not for theatrics, for alignment. That's how you build the lawful rebellion inside you. Not anarchic, not destructive, not rebellious for its own sake, but rooted in principle. Principle, your labor is yours. Principle, your mind is yours. Principle, your presence is yours. And if a system, relationship, workplace, family, culture demands otherwise, you resist. That pushback might cost you. It might cause tears. It might cost connection. It might cost money. That's fine. Locke said revolution is justified when government betrays its purpose. And government worthy of mention isn't just the state. It's every institution that governs your life by default. So when she demands your time, your energy, your identity, beyond mutual support, she's governing you. When your job demands ideological compliance over contribution, it's governing you. When your social feed demands obedience to narratives, it's governing you. And you have a masculine duty, revolt, not to destroy, but to reclaim. This isn't rage, it's resolution. You do it by building your boundaries. You do it by agreeing to serve no authority that doesn't serve your life in return. You do it by speaking truth to alignment. You do it by cultivating silence when noise demands response. You do it by learning again that you are master of your domain. And domain means mind, body, spirit, mission. This is modern masculinity in a masculine age. No, the world doesn't need another influencer or empty philosopher. It demands men who refuse to be stolen from, by fear, by shame, by convenience. It demands your revolt. You didn't wake up to sit down. You woke to own every ounce of who you are. Locke didn't just talk about governments. He talked about men. He talked about property. And not just acres or gold, but your body, your mind, your energy, your right to control what you produce, what you think, what you give. And if someone takes that from you through guilt, pressure, shame, manipulation, without your consent, that is theft. You feel this every time you give more than you want to. Every time you hold your tongue when your truth aches to be spoken. Every time you rearrange your rhythm to avoid her mood. That's theft. That's unpaid rent on the property of your being. And Locke would tell you this: if you don't build fences, don't act surprised when they walk through your garden. Because modern tyranny doesn't wear chains. It wears expectation. It wears emotional blackmail. It wears good man pressure until you forget where your yes ends and their control begins. You think you're choosing, but you're obeying. Because without ownership of self, there is no freedom. Not in love, not in work, not in art, not even in your own damn thoughts. Locke said the reason men enter into society at all is to protect what's theirs. So when society becomes the thief, when intimacy becomes control, when your workplace demands your spine in exchange for a paycheck, you're no longer in society. You're in a cage. And worse, you're calling it responsibility. But here's the truth. Locke would shove in your face. Responsibility without sovereignty is slavery dressed up as virtue. You're not being a better man by sacrificing your edges to make someone else feel safe. You're being compliant, and the culture calls that progress. But Locke calls it exactly what it is: capitulation. You don't owe anyone your freedom just because they cry when you express it. And this is where feminine tyranny creeps in. Not all women, but the culture that weaponizes the feminine, that demands you be softer, gentler, more agreeable, that tells you your drive is aggression, that your boundaries are domination, that your refusal is toxic, and the second you believe it, you give them the deed to your soul. Now you smile when you want to roar. You apologize when you should be standing. You chase comfort instead of conquest. You say yes to peace while bleeding dignity. That's not partnership, that's imprisonment, and it's dressed in silk. Locke wouldn't tell you to fight her. He'd tell you to reclaim yourself, to realize that your will is your first property, and it's your duty to protect it like land. You don't let anyone camp on it. You don't let anyone guilt trip you for defending it. You don't ask for permission to enforce it. This starts at the micro level. The moment she sighs and says, "It's fine," and you know it's not fine. But instead of standing firm, you fold. That's the moment you hand her the deed. The moment your manager says, "Can you stay late again?" And you say, "Sure," not because you want to, but because you don't want to upset him. That's the moment you lose leverage. It's not the big things, it's the daily erosion. And no one comes to stop it. No one saves a man who doesn't protect himself. That's the lie you were sold, that someone else would defend you, that the system would take care of you, that your niceness would be rewarded. But Locke never wrote about rewards for obedience. He wrote about the necessity of resistance, because what you tolerate today becomes law tomorrow. You tolerate one insult to your time, and soon your schedule isn't yours anymore. You tolerate one emotional manipulation, and soon you're walking on eggshells in your own house. You tolerate one compromise, and now your identity is a costume. And here's the brutal truth. You let it happen. Not because you're evil, because you wanted peace. You wanted to be loved. You wanted to be the good guy. But good without sovereignty is just a trained dog. And Locke would slap you awake. That goodness you cling to is the leash they'll pull until you break. So what do? You stop playing their game. You stop asking, "Is this too much?" and start asking, "Does this honor me?" You stop apologizing for boundaries and start enforcing them before they're tested. You stop wondering how you can keep everyone happy and start deciding who even deserves access. That's masculine governance, not the rule of others, the rule of self. You become your own lawmaker. You become the defender of your own peace, the one who watches over your soul like a fortress, not cold, but clear. And when feminine culture calls you selfish, you say, "Good," because only a man who owns himself can ever give freely. That's the paradox. When you're sovereign, your love is real, because it's not performative, it's chosen. When you're sovereign, your leadership is clean, because it's not about power, it's about principle. When you're sovereign, your life becomes yours again. Locke didn't write with emotion. He wrote with fire and logic, and that fire still burns in your refusal, in your boundaries, in your mission, in your decision to say, "This is mine, and I protect it," not for glory, not for applause, but because a man without ownership is not a man. He's a tool, a ghost in someone else's life, and I refuse to die that way. Let's end the illusion. You've been told that rebellion is wrong, that peace is always the goal, that compromise is mature, that silence is strength. But Locke said something different, something dangerous, something every truly free man feels deep in his bones. When the system betrays its purpose, revolution isn't just allowed, it's required. This doesn't mean anarchy, it means alignment. It means you don't get to blame the culture for softening you if you let it. It means you don't get to cry about being dominated if you hand them the keys. It means if the life you're living doesn't reflect your values, that's not an accident, that's surrender. And a man who won't revolt has already lost. Look around you. You live in a time where comfort is currency and confrontation is criminalized, where men whisper while falsehoods shout, where rebellion is branded as insecurity, as if your refusal to be enslaved makes you dangerous. But here's what Locke knew, and what you're remembering. Dangerous men are necessary, not reckless men, not cruel men, but men with backbone, with principles, with the kind of presence that can't be tamed by feelings. The world doesn't want that, because the world has built systems to harvest men's strength without honoring it. They want your grind, but not your edge. They want your loyalty, but not your independence. They want your submission, dressed up in self-sacrifice. But Locke's message was clear. When those in power stop serving the people must stop obeying. And you are one of those people. You don't need a crown to recognize a tyrant. Sometimes tyranny shows up in the mirror. Every time you fold to avoid tension, you're your own tyrant. Every time you dilute your truth for approval, you're your own oppressor. Every time you say yes to a life that doesn't light your soul on fire, you've betrayed your constitution. This isn't poetic, it's personal. You don't need a revolution of the world, you need a revolution of self. And that revolution doesn't start with noise, it starts with discipline, with reclaiming every inch of your day, your time, your inputs, your output, your language, your presence. Because here's the truth Locke understood before influencers ever existed. Freedom is earned. You don't get it by being nice. You don't get it by fitting in. You get it by building your mind so strong, your soul so sharp, that the world either respects your edges or gets cut by them. And you do that in silence, not in protests, not in posts, in practice. You show up to your training when it's inconvenient. You build your business when the dopamine fades. You speak up in rooms that were designed to mute you. That's revolution. That's rebellion. That's the man Locke was calling to. Not the peasant begging for fairness, but the king reclaiming his land. And yes, some people will flinch. They'll say you're too much, too cold, too direct, too assertive. Let them. You weren't made to be palatable. You were made to be principled, because a man without principles is a tool, a mouthpiece for the latest trend, a servant to the most emotional person in the room. And Locke's philosophy cuts deeper than that. He didn't just say you have rights. He said you have responsibilities. The responsibility to rebel when you're being used. The responsibility to think when others just feel. The responsibility to build when others beg. The responsibility to guard your mind like it matters. Because it does. So here's your battleground now. Your morning routine. That's revolution. Your ability to say no without guilt. That's revolution. Your refusal to shrink when a woman tests your frame. That's revolution. Not out of spite, out of sovereignty. Because men like you don't need applause. You don't need followers. You don't need likes or nods or acceptance. You need one thing: clarity. Clarity of what you stand for. Clarity of what you'll fight for. Clarity of who you're becoming, regardless of who approves. That's the foundation Locke laid down centuries ago. Not a plea for fairness, a blueprint for fire. A blueprint that starts with, you own your body, you own your time, you own your thoughts, and if anyone or anything dares try to take them, you don't negotiate, you don't plead, you revolt. In how you walk, in what you say, in what you refuse to tolerate. You revolt by building a life so deeply yours, no one can access it without your permission. You revolt by creating work so sharp, so true, so undeniable, it answers to no algorithm. You revolt by becoming so present that chaos cannot sway you and culture cannot cancel you. That's Locke's vision, that's your mission. And no, it won't be easy. You will lose people. You will get misunderstood. You will be tested over and over and over again. But here's the cost of avoiding all that. You become soft. You become vague. You become a mascot for ideas you never agreed to. And you die wondering what your life could have looked like if you had just stood up once and said, no more. No more shrinking. No more pleasing. No more obeying systems that neuter your masculine fire. It ends here. You revolt, not with bullets, but with breath. Not with hate, but with honesty. Not with noise, but with unshakable presence. That's how you build legacy. Not by pleasing, by planting flags. So plant yours, on your time, on your mission, on your soul, and don't move it for anyone. And if this message aligned with something deep in you, hit subscribe.